Thank you, Aoife, and thanks to Catherine for being here. I'm just going to get started. So this is the fourth in our series of capacity building workshops, um, and we're looking at communication and dissemination strategies today. Um, so I'll just do a quick run through of the agenda. So I'm just going to do a short introduction to what Creative Europe Desk does, and then a little bit of like an introduction to the communication questions um, in that you'll be dealing with in the application. And then Catherine's going to talk through effective communication and dissemination strategies. And then, as Eve has mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions too. So yeah, pop them in the chat or feel free to put your mic on at the very end, and we can have a chat about it then. So the kind of structure of the Creative Europe Desk is that we have three offices. So we have a media desk in Dublin, we have a media office in Galway, and then we have a culture office, which is comprised of myself and Aoife, and that's situated within the Arts Council. So what we do is we provide information, advice, and assistance to Irish applicants who are applying to Creative Europe programs. And then we promote the program at a local, regional, and national level. We also collaborate with key sectorial stakeholders and agencies. And we also collaborate with the wider Creative Europe Desk network. And we also assist with the partner searches. And there's actually an event coming up about that we can, we'll talk about a little bit later. And then we also have cross-sectorial partnerships and events with the media office as well. So why the EU funds culture? So there's the intrinsic value. I think we're all probably, everyone on this call is probably agreed in that. But then there's also kind of like historical treaty commitments, which also influence the policy. And yeah, there's the kind of broader EU policy that informs the kind of questions in the applications. So it can be good to be familiar with these broader kind of policy documents to kind of understand why you're being asked certain things and how they kind of like the kind of priorities came about in the first place. And then how the EU funding is distributed or funded. So we have direct funding actions. So for example, like the European Capital of Culture or different prizes. A key one today is the European Prize for Literature. And then there's also popular music, contemporary architecture, and cultural heritage. And then we have the centrally administered funding program, which is the current one that we're in right now, which is 2021 to 2027. And that encompasses culture, media, and cross-sector strands. And then this is a kind of budget breakdown for media, culture, and cross-sectorial. And that's over the course of this current cycle. And then there's priorities within culture. So there's things like resilience and recovery, innovation and joint creation, cooperation and exchange of practices, key players and multipliers, and then capacity building of artists. So then just to get into the cooperation projects, excuse me. So cooperation projects are a multi-annual artistic or cultural project. They involve partnerships between organizations in different countries. That's essential. And it also achieves common objectives across borders. It requires match funding, and individuals aren't eligible to apply, but artists participate in cooperation projects via organizations. So artists are still key stakeholders within cooperation projects, but you have to be in an organization to apply. Then we also, the cooperation projects also support diverse partnerships and fund like a broad range of activities. Oops. So then just to kind of get more into the communication question, this is in the application form. So you'll be asked directly about communication when you're filling this out. So the question is describe the communication and dissemination activities which are planned in order to promote the project activities. and results and project activities and results, and to maximize the impact. So to who, which format, how many. Clarify how you will reach the target groups, relevant stakeholders, policymakers, and the general public, and explain the choice of the dissemination channels. So I guess what they're looking for there is what I suppose Catherine is going to talk about in terms of like having an overall strategy and then how you're going to implement that. And then the other thing that's kind of important to note is work packages. So you'll be organizing your project into work packages. And you can identify a lead partner for each work package if that's necessary for the type of work package that it is. But basically what you're doing within them is establishing who does what and when. And each work package should have an objective, so like an expected outcome. It'll also have like a list of activities and then key milestones within the timeline, and then deliverables, so outputs. And then there's a little bit more detail here. This is from the basically the guidelines, like the call document. So this table here is from that. And this is kind of like an example that the Commission gives about communication and dissemination and how you would structure your work package. And they say that it's not essential, it's suggested, but I would definitely suggest having a package on communication. So yeah, it is really key, I think. So then just some examples of other Creative Europe projects and the kind of types of communication that they use. There's a few there, and when we circulate the PowerPoint, you can like look at these links. And we've kind of highlighted a few that also use the co-funded by the European Union logo as well, like on kind of like poster kind of content, because it is really useful in terms of dissemination that like, yeah, people know where the money is coming from. So it is sort of best practice to be using this when you are funded. And there is a Creative Europe Desk logo as well. So if you're working with us, you should use that one. Just a little bit of sort of housekeeping there in terms of that. But there's also within the examples, there's like short form video content and like different sort of like overall sort of strategies that become apparent that these organizations are using. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine, who's going to talk about all of that in detail. Thanks, Catherine.
Great. Thanks, guys. Right, I'm just going to share my screen, so just give me a minute. Start. Great. You should all be able to see my screen there. Is that okay? Cool. Well, first of all, thanks a million to everyone for having me along this morning. So I'm Catherine Griffin. I work as a consultant in communications and strategy across the art sector, and I also work as an executive coach as well. Sorry, yeah, perfect. So as you can see, kind of I've kind of interesting career history. I always had a love for the arts. I started in art history, but then accidentally ended up working for about kind of 12 years in multinational tech companies, working primarily actually in online advertising. So really getting a lot of deep expertise in communications there. And then came back to the bright side and had a lovely time working in National Gallery. So I was there, head of public engagement. I also spent some time in the Arts Council as interim communications director. And now I work freelance, so I work across lots of clients on communications and strategy. So the goal this morning is to really focus on giving you guys a simple framework and tools to look at kind of how to kind of plan out your communications section of your application for Creative Europe. I know that there's nothing scarier than a blank page when you're sitting down to start some of these funding applications. So the aim is to give you that framework to help you get started. The diversity in your projects is very, very large. So this morning, it's not going to be an interactive session. I'm going to focus on giving you tools and framework, and I'm going to illustrate that with an example. But at the end of this, we're going to, after we stop recording, we're going to stay on for questions. And at that point, we can kind of get on and we can brainstorm some of the more specific challenges or questions that you have at that stage. Brilliant. So I know Lucy kind of covered some of this already in terms of kind of the context of this within the Creative Europe application. But this is a big chunk of your application. So it's 20% of the available marks. So it is certainly kind of worth looking at in detail. In terms of Creative Europe, in terms of what they're looking for, they really are looking for specifics. And when we kind of have a look at some of the feedback that's coming through, we'll see that that's really important to them, that you are showing kind of specific actions that you're going to take, and also that you're showing that your activities are realistic and measurable as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So Aoife and Lucy kind of shared some past feedback from Creative Europe about the communication side. And I think this is really helpful, and we'll go back to this kind of as we go through the presentation, because it's great to know where some applications are falling down so that we can learn a bit more about what they're looking for and learn about kind of some of the potential pitfalls. So, and I know Lucy already talked about this, but obviously the EU support and making sure that you've mentioned very specifically how that's going to be visible within the project. The next one, is the communication strategy being too vague and not being able to be evaluated. So a big focus today is going to be on specifics, and I'll be talking to you about how you can really build detail into your strategy and build in kind of specific audience numbers and really drill down into what you're trying to do. And then also supporting that kind of with very strong kind of measurement as well. Budget as well, and I think this is always an interesting one for everyone, especially working in the arts. We're all working with limited budgets, but we need to be sure that the budget we're allocating is realistic for what we're trying to achieve. So, for example, that we're not saying, yes, we're going to reach all of Ireland with like a €2,000 budget, because that's not realistic. So it's about making sure that we're also providing evidence for why the budget that we're allocating is going to be sufficient to deliver this. Which also leads into the next point around attracting large numbers. If we're trying to reach a large audience, we have to be able to support that. So feedback as well about kind of, just developed kind of methodology and targets and channels. So really thinking about how we're going to deliver our ideas. And then in terms of the positives that they came back as well, where they're seeing very positive communication strategy, is they're saying something that was deeply collaborative, that it's been well described, that it's a very precise kind of plan, and that plan is corresponding very clearly to a target group. So they're the kind of positive things that are coming through there. Okay, so as we're working through this, I would love you just to even take a minute to kind of write down on a piece of paper, what are you currently finding challenging? And it could be just getting started, which can often be the hardest bit. How long do you typically have to spend on your communication strategy, and where you're fitting it into your planning process? So just kind of have a think about those things as we're working through this. And as I said, at the end of this presentation, we can kind of stop and we can talk through some of the more specific challenges that you're having. Okay, so looking at the question in detail. So the bits that are really, really important to me is, promoting the activities and results, but really maximizing the impact. And they're very specific in this: to whom, which format, how many, etc. I think they're very clear that they want detail in your application. So clarifying how you will reach the target groups. So that also starts with that you have very specific target groups, that you've thought who your stakeholders are. Are they policymakers? Are they general public? And then that you don't just say, this is how I'm going to reach these people, but you're also saying why. Why is this channel most appropriate to reach this group? So this is what we're going to be touching on as we work through the model that I'm going to give you. So this is a very kind of simple communications framework. I use this all of the time. I've used this for very broad kind of communications, broad reaching communication strategies. I use this for internal communication. It's a very kind of simple framework that can be adapted in so many different ways, because it really is about the fundamentals of your communications campaign. So we're, first of all, I always start with the audience. Understanding who are we talking to? Who does this matter to? And not just about the general public, but also kind of who are some of our collaborators, who are our stakeholders, really thinking about everyone this matters to, and kind of dividing them into groups. I would say ideally you don't want to have too many in this group, so you want to be kind of putting them in. Generally, you want to have kind of 3 to 4 maximum audiences within your communications framework. Then next, we say, well, what are we trying to say to these? And we're going to spend some time on messaging as well. And then the goals is what do we want to happen? What do we want this audience to do? What do we want to achieve within these audience? And then the delivery is, how do we do this? And then within all of this, just make sure that we're making sure the funders are properly acknowledged as well, so that we're weaving all of that through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a specific show to give you an example of how to pull the strategy together. I've used the Very Hungry Caterpillar Christmas show, which was recently on in the Pavilion in Dún Laoghaire, because it's very cute. But also it's kind of a neutral show, and because I'm deeply aware that your projects are all very different, but I want to give you something specific to show you how you can apply this framework. And to show you some of the tools that are available to you. Okay, so we're going to start off with audience, as I said, because that's my absolute kind of must place to start is your audience. Who are you talking to? And again, coming back to some of the feedback from Creative Europe is, that not enough thought was put into some of the audiences. Maybe we're being over ambitious with who we're trying to reach, and or haven't actually really defined who our audiences are. So there's a couple of things that you can do to start when you're thinking about who your audiences are. So you can first of all start with characteristics, and this is often where people start, and it's sometimes where people end. And I would say it's not the only thing is your characteristics, but it's a good place to start. So first of all, locations. Where are they based? How many of them are there? Roughly ideas. What languages are they speaking? What's their background, kind of socioeconomic background? What kind of education levels do they have, etc. And we're going to go through some tools that you can use to pull this out. This is where you can really support your application with specifics. And there are some brilliant sources that you can use to put in very specific numbers about this. But I would also urge you to think beyond the characteristics and next think about, well, how did they feel about you? Because it's a really important thing that's going to influence how you're going to reach them. So do they like you? Are they already feeling positive? Or they may be a bit negative? Or most importantly, are they totally unaware? Because that's going to feed into a different approach. And then next is information sources. Where did they get their information from? So what types of newspapers are they reading? What types of social media are they on? Where are they spending their time? And I got some really nice tools that you can use. And again, this is where being very specific in your response is really going to help you. And then lastly, what did they need? So what are they interested in? So what type of information serves them? So your audience is most likely to engage with something that is going to help them in some way, or is kind of driving a particular interest for them. So I have looked at the tools that you can use for some of these. So in terms of characteristics, a great place to start if you're looking at Ireland, it's the Arts Council audience mapping. You can go in and it's on the Arts Council website. And if you haven't used it yet, I would very much urge you to do it, because you can pull very specific numbers on it. You can really build great numbers into that. The next place I would always say is go to the Arts Engagement Survey, which has very specific data on how people are engaging with the arts in Ireland, and you can build an awful lot of specific data in with that. Another source that I use an awful lot is datareportal.com, maybe a little less known, but again, it has a huge amount of information that is Ireland specific, but actually it also does every country across Europe or globally. So if you're building out a campaign that is potentially reaching outside of Ireland, there's a lot of great stuff in it in Data Reportal for you. And I'll show you a screenshot of that. Then the census as well, but of course your audience data. So if you're basing an application around a particular organization where you have audience data, absolutely build that in. Then the next bit is how they feel about you. Again, you've got your own audience data there. You can think about social media comments. Arts engagement survey has an awful lot about how people feel about different arts in Ireland, and Performing Arts Forum audience insights is super helpful too. Where they get the information from. So this is again coming back to what sources are they using to get information. So it's these three again: Data Reportal, Arts Engagement Survey, Performing Arts Forum. These will all let you back up your approach with data, basically. And then finally, what do they need? So, an example of this in terms of Performing Arts Forum insights, they'll often say, that particular place will look at kind of, what are kind of first time attendees looking at from their kind of visit to the arts. So there's a lot of really nice place in that, piece of data in that. And then, of course, your own audience feedback. Okay, so I put this into action for the Hungry Caterpillar. So what I've done is I've used our arts audience mapping to pull out my target audience within that. I've then looked at kind of Indigo Performing Arts Insights that tells me that 76% of audiences are generally within 30 minutes of the venue. And then I also look at my arts audience mapping to tell me what socioeconomic groups they are. I'm then using Performing Arts Forum to find out that people are already feeling pretty positive about this show, about the organisation, the Pavilion Theatre that's running it. And I know that my main barrier is finding the time for this particular group that I'm looking at. In terms of where they get their information from, primarily a lot with internet, so Instagram, Facebook, and again, that's where I'm pulling this information from. And friends and family recommendations, email lists, website are also strong follow-up sources. So I'm able to say where I'm getting all this information from. And what they need is they need that strong emotional why, because they're a time poor audience. They need an easy path to book because they're time poor. Lots of advance notice because they like to plan. And the information about the production is a key motivator. So as you can see, there's sources for all of this. Datareportal.com, if you're not using it already, definitely do pull information from it. It's got an absolute wealth there, from population statistics, but it gives you a lot of detail around media usage, the amount of time people are spending on streaming, broadcast TV, radio, press, etc. It also has some good stuff around travel and tourism and e-commerce, if that's relevant to what you're looking at. That's just a screenshot of some of it. So definitely spend some time diving into that. So next is messages. So your message is the connection between you and your audience. So again, this is a phrase I use an awful lot around planning communications, is we start with what do you want your audience to know about you? How do you want them to feel, and what do you want them to do? So I always use that as my framework to create my message. So I want my audience to know that there's a production of Hungry Caterpillar running over Christmas. I want them to feel nostalgic, excited, because obviously it's parents who are booking this. So they're feeling nostalgic to their own memories of the Hungry Caterpillar, but also that sense of urgency to get it booked. And what do I want them to do? I want them to book tickets and to tell their friends and family. So I'm pulling this into my key message, which is a joyful production of a much-loved classic in your local theatre for a limited time this Christmas. So that's a kind of message that I want to be putting across all of my communications. Next, I'm feeding this into goals. And again, and I think this is also very specific, kind of coming from the work packages that Lucy was talking about. Creative Europe really want to see specific goals. They want you to think about what you're trying to achieve with your communication plans, and they want to make sure that it can be measured and that it can be evaluated. So in terms of putting your goals together, every goal should kind of obviously follow the SMART acronym. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. But also, why do you want to do it? It's because firstly, decide where to focus, decide where you're going to spend your time. Also to think about what resources you have, and we'll talk a little bit about more as well, to make sure that if you've got the beautiful big plans, that you also are able to back that up with your resources. Very, very importantly, it's always important to decide what you're not going to do. And this is deciding what you're not going to do is as important as what you are going to do. And then obviously making sure that you're supporting the previous two steps, your audience and message. So your key question is, when you get to the end of this project, what do you want to have accomplished? So some sample communication goals could be raising awareness around an initiative, driving attendance, increasing engagement from a particular audience, changing how you communicate or making a channel more efficient. So I think it's about kind of helping you really prioritize your communications efforts and having that link back to delivering the project. So I put 3 goals in place for the Hungry Caterpillar. And again, I'm going back to my audience and I'm going back to what am I trying to tell them? So what do I want them to do and think and feel? But I'm also thinking about, what matters to them. So what are some of their characteristics? So my first goal is around getting 30% bookings by September. And this is because I know my audience. It's a family audience. They're time poor and they like to get things booked in. And also I know that commercially early bookings will drive word of mouth. So, and then secondly, I want to maybe get some schools in pre-Christmas, because obviously that's good for revenue in terms of getting block bookings, but also that's going to drive further word of mouth. And then finally, I want to think about collaboration with partners and something on a socially beneficial initiative, because again, my audience is very value driven and it's addressing a strong local need. So the delivery is then, how do I actually make this happen? And again, coming back to some of the feedback, some of the feedback that's coming through is there's big ambitions, but there's not enough evidence to support how we're going to do this. Or there's a limited budget. So again, we've got big ideas, but we're really not backing that up with the big budget that we do need. And where things are really cutting through is where there's very precise kind of media marketing plan. So that's really what they're looking for, is they're saying, we really want to see your very specific plan that corresponds to the target group that you've outlined. And this is the delivery side of it. So the key kind of considerations are, I always break resources into both time and budget, because the resources is about your time and your team's time as well. We're all kind of pulled in a million different directions, and we need to be realistic about what we can do, or whether we need to bring somebody else in to work with this. And then the budget as well is that we are kind of costing up what we want to do. And then it comes back to, where's your audience? So we go back to all of our sources around the Arts Engagement Survey, around the Performing Arts Forum, around Data Report, and say, where is my audience? And how much do I need to spend? And how can I actually get in front of them? Who can you partner with? Is there anyone else who can help you with this? Are there other channels that you can be using to promote your message? And then it's about kind of building in your actions to support the goals. So, I mean, it's always good to think about all of the potential tools you have. You've obviously got public relations, which, depending on your own organization, on your own network, can be you're either kind of paying somebody else to do that on your behalf, or these are things that are within your remit to do. Email newsletters, your own. Other organizations are becoming increasingly important as well, and we'll touch a bit on social media and some of the challenges that are happening there. There is an increasing move back to email newsletters. It's very clear within Performing Arts Forum surveys as well how important these are to arts audiences. But as social media becomes more challenging and more expensive, they're a really, really strong tool to be using. Then we will, again, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about social media specifically. But then, of course, we have paid advertising, and we have all of those different elements. You can be going back to data reportal, to your arts engagement survey to back up why you're choosing different pieces, and then also making sure that you're costing them effectively. And then obviously you have other things like events and partnerships. So in terms of my delivery plan that I put together for the Hungry Caterpillar, as you can see, against every audience, I have my message, I have a goal, a widest goal, and then I have my delivery plan. And again, I'm trying to make the delivery plan very specific. So I'm going to do like targeted social media advertising to local parents. I'm going to do an early bird offer via my newsletter, schools newsletter, school visits, targeted social media advertising, for like the kind of policymakers and kind of promoting that socially beneficial aspect of it. We'll organise some fruit delivery to local schools as well. So something cute and something fun, and that will kind of promote the ideas within the Hungry Caterpillar. And underpinning all of this, we have our budget, we have our timing. So how much is everything going to cost? So we're putting specific numbers against all of these in terms of how much we're going to spend, when we're going to do these, and what are our targets as well. Okay, so in terms of social media, I just want to take a moment to talk about some of the challenges that are happening there. So intuitively, a lot of us feel that, where we do have our own social media channels, that you post something and it kind of gets to all of our followers, because that's intuitively what we feel. What actually happens is it's going through a series of processes, and on average, it's getting to about 5% of your followers when you're posting through your own channels. Excuse me. Now, my experience in the arts is that percentage is generally higher for the arts, which is good news. And that's partly because the content in the arts is more interesting than some of what like brands are pushing out. So you are starting from a place of advantage. But it is getting increasingly difficult. And even since I put these slides, I kind of put a lot of this together kind of last June. And since then, the algorithms have changed hugely again. So for example, like followers have become even less important on social media than they used to be. And it's becoming, I think where you're noticing a lot on Instagram, for example, is people are being served a lot of content that is nothing to do with people they're following, but it's driven by their interests. So it's becoming more like kind of the TikTok algorithm in that sense. And what that means is it can be harder to push through those algorithms. Excuse me, sorry. In terms of what can help your content succeed, this I'm not going to talk through, is for reference. And again, even some of this, these tips are becoming out of date so quickly at the moment. But the things that will help is engaging content is the kind of summary of this. But what you really need to do in social media, if you want to make sure that your post is getting to your audience, is advertising. And I think this is forgotten about. We sometimes think about social media as the free channel. And I really want to impress on you, especially for a communications plan, that we just absolutely can't take that approach. You cannot assume that your message is going to get out there. And I would say you absolutely have to be supporting your social media activity with advertising. Doesn't need to be a huge amount, but there does need to be some advertising in there to make sure that you're reaching your target audience. And then the benefit there is you can micro target, so you can be very specific about who you're trying to get to when you do use it. Okay, so coming on to measurement. So in terms of when you're deciding your metrics, it's a lot about kind of thinking about, what data do you have access to? What can you use from kind of past projects to set realistic targets? That was some of the feedback, again, coming through from Creative Europe, is that sense that sometimes the targets weren't specific enough or weren't realistic. So we want to be putting numbers against our measurement goals as much as possible. So when we think about what we can be measuring, we can measure attendance. You could also measure online reach as well. And then you can increase your potential in online reach through advertising or working with partners. Or you can be about a specific audience that you're trying to reach, and you can put metrics about that. So the kind of summary of the strategy format, and again, this is something I use with all of my clients in different ways. The strategy format remains the same, but it gets executed in lots of different ways according to what the project is. So we start with our audience, we then think about what we're trying to say to them, and then we base our goals and our delivery plan around that. And then underpinning all of that is our measurement and making sure that we're taking account of what we're trying to say to them. So in terms of key takeaways, start with your audience, always start with them. Think about who you're talking to, what do they need, and how are you going to reach them. Next, be really specific, and I think that's loud and clear from Creative Europe. They want you to be very specific about what you're going to do to reach these audiences. What channels are you going to use? How are you going to use them? When are you going to do it? And then being realistic. If we want to go after broad audiences, we have to have the budgets there to support that. But you can use partnerships cross communication as well to help with that. But again, being realistic around it. But the last one, and I think this is the kind of gift within the arts, is the ability to communicate your passion, and I think this is the number one thing to be building into your communication is tell them your why. Audiences engage with stories. So we really want to be focusing on, the passion within these projects. Why are you doing this? What's really going to make an audience engage, and moving away from the what, just kind of communicating information. And that's the lovely thing about working within the arts, is everyone just, has that natural inclination to be able to do that really, really well. Okay, so I think that's kind of most of it. So we just have a think about, is there anything that we talked about today that surprised you? Maybe take a note. Is there anything you're going to do differently? And then we can talk a little bit at the end about anything we didn't cover. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and go back to Lucy.
Thanks so much, Catherine. That's really, really great. It's really thorough. And yeah, I'm hoping that everyone's going to use Catherine's vast knowledge while we have her here. So if you have any questions, do pop them in. I'm just going to share a little bit more information just about our upcoming events, and then we're going to go to questions. Just get this slide up. So the next thing, kind of main thing at the minute, is that the Creative Europe desks, a few different desks are collaborating on a matchmaking session on the 13th of March. So today's the deadline to register to pitch your project, but you have a little bit longer to register to observe as an attendee, which might be good just to even have an idea of the types of projects that people are working on. Yeah, and then just stay in touch with us. We are very active in our newsletter, also on our social media, and then we put all our past events on our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And my email and Aoife's email are down the bottom here. So if you're making an application and you're kind of working through it, do get in touch with us, because we can offer advice on that. So I'm going to see if there's any